Thanks, everybody. Now, this panel is a little bit different. We're going to talk about yet another acronym. Have there been enough acronyms this week, by the way?
Yeah.
And they always change just about when you figure out how to spell the acronyms, they change them. So ESG, what is that? It's environment, social, and governance. So the environment piece is kind of obvious. You know, it's air, water, waste, climate, energy, those kinds of things. Those that we're pretty familiar with. What is social? That's safety. It's taking care of your people. It's taking care of the community around your operations. It's reaching out to the world for, in our company, fair and inclusive trade. It's diversity and inclusion. Then what is the G? This is the new one. The new one is governance, and that is, how do you know? How do you know if you really got it done? How do you set those metrics? In what areas do you need to be working? What about responsible procurement? Working with your vendors and making sure they are meeting your standards. So that's what this ESG acronym is. And so now you've got a whole new portfolio of acronyms to start this cohort 11. And by the time you finish it, no doubt there will be new ones. So today we're going to think about everything around us. How it got here, how it was made, transported, sold, or used. Think about your coffee, which you just picked up, the chair you're sitting on, the clothes you're wearing, your phone, this microphone, even the heating and air conditioning system that makes this room bearable. All of those industrial pieces. And how do those being made, transported, sold, and used impact the world around us and the people in the world? Because that's what we're really talking about now with this ESG concept. So for the next hour, we're going to talk about ESG and supply chains and looking at the manufacturing aspects, the regulatory aspects, a few technologies, transportation and geopolitics, because that's also a piece of it. Cultures around the world are very different. What does diversity mean in Thailand? Or in Dubai? That's not trivial. So we'll talk about the impacts here and the far corners of the world. Now here's how we're going to run this. I'm first going to go down the row here and let each of these people pronounce their names for you so that I don't have to. They'll tell you who they are, who they work with, and what their role is in that organization. And then we'll come back and they'll do an opening statement talking about what's new, but I'll tell you a little bit about that question when we get back. So, Travis.
Sure thing. Wonderful to meet everybody. My name's Travis Miller. I'm an attorney and environmental scientist by background. I currently serve as the head of supply chain compliance and social responsibility at Google. I founded a couple startups along the way, or helped scale. One named Descent, which deals with products and physical goods. One named Cargo Watch, which does real-time tracking and customs clearance work. And I've written 3 books for the American Bar Association on the topic of ESG, environmental health and safety, and supply chain compliance. So pleasure to be on the panel, and thank you so much for including me.
Okay.
Hi everyone, honored to be here. My name is Amrita Saigal, and I'm the founder and CEO of a new baby diaper startup called Kudos Diapers. We make disposable diapers out of cotton and sugarcane fiber.
I'm Steve Weinberg, and it's great to see everybody here. I have a role of a sustainability leader with IKEA supply chain operations, and that's the part that moves products from factories to warehouses and stores.
Hi, pleasure to be here today. My name is Melissa Owen. I work for myself. My firm is Ambiente. I help companies with plants and products across Latin America and try to be a bridge between cultures, laws, and languages for my clients and make sure that the product launches are a huge success down in my region.
Hello everyone, my name is Josue Alzamora. I am currently part of the regional leadership team for Latin America at Maersk. I basically take care of business development and strategic projects. But I just started with that role not long ago after having relocated to Panama a month ago. I've spent the last 12 years pretty much around different European countries, working, of course, for Maersk in different capacities and global roles and regional roles. And as such, I've been able to experience a lot of collaboration and interactions around the world with several different companies and customers, which is something that I will speak to later during the session.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. And as you can see, this is an all-star panel with lots of different perspectives to hear. So what we're going to do is each one of them has a maximum of 3 minutes to talk about what about sustainability is new and impactful in your world. You know, what does sustainability mean in your organization and to you? And what are your focus areas and priorities? Shall we start with you?
All right, I'll lead her off. So I'd say at its core, I think the most interesting dynamic we're starting to see in the global space is the regulation of ESG, the regulation of sustainability. And why I find that particularly interesting is so much of what we built was around voluntary metrics, voluntary designs, and I, for one, just as a personal standpoint, love laws. Everything that we do, is based on laws, and all the things I've been able to create are based on the standards that laws allow us to have. Without that, we couldn't have a market, unless you knew that you were going to get something back in exchange. You couldn't have a transaction or a purchase. The whole global world is kind of set up around these laws. So as the environmental, social governance rules start to now get regulated, as they start to get defined by the legal consequence, now we have an even playing field. Now everybody knows what you have to do to meet this requirement, to make that disclosure. And that allows you to communicate effectively and to be able to talk to one another across very dynamic, very diverse supply chains. I also think that the convergence of those rules, whether it be the trade, whether it be the product rules for import, whether it be the social responsibility metrics, all kind of aligning and coming together, has really been an interesting evolution to the law.
Okay, interesting. Amrita.
Very cool. So I'm coming from the baby diaper industry. So baby diapers, fun fact of the day, that baby diapers are the 3rd largest consumer item in landfills today because, babies shit a lot, and we from 0 to potty trained, and in the U.S. potty trained is getting closer and closer to 3 years old. You're going through about 7,000 diapers. Here's a Kudos diaper, but with any other diaper on the market, everything in the diaper is polypropylene and polyethylene. So you can just think about how much plastic is going into this product. And until we're the only brand on the market that has 100% cotton touching your baby's skin. Are we 100% biodegradable plant-based? No, there is still elastic in the diaper, there's still plastic tabs, but we are working towards that. So until now, when people said eco-friendly diapers, I think like Honest was really the pioneer in doing this. It meant no added dyes, fragrances, chemicals, added fragrances, dyes, etc. I feel like people use the word no chemicals in marketing, but I think as engineers, that's a hard one to say. Everything is a chemical. So I think the reality is that, which was absolutely a step in the right direction, but now the industry is at a point of like, parents are demanding cleaner, safer ingredients for their products, for things that are touching their baby's skin. Parents are buying all organic cotton clothing. They're doing everything they can to have the cleanest ingredients in what they're eating, what's touching their skin, the lotions, the creams they put on. So why should diapers be any different? Why should my baby be sitting in 100% plastic all day? So this is what we're really working on, is how do we make them out of all cotton and sugarcane fiber? And I will get on later into the challenges of the supply chain issues and why this is still very new in the diaper industry.
And why do I have this feeling that you actually travel around with a diaper in your pocket all the time?
I know. So easier to show with visual.
Cool.
Steve.
So what's new for me around sustainability? This was the first year in supply chain operations that we got a glimpse of what a zero emissions good flow could look like. It's a really big deal. Couldn't have imagined it a few years ago. And what we were seeing is that we're getting heavy-duty electric vehicles in all of our regions. We have a network of fuel cells operating. We've achieved over 50% renewable energy electricity share in our warehousing. We've moved to over 50% intermodal share, most of that on rail. And we have some partnerships that we think will bring on zero-emission ocean vessels within 2 years. So from end to end, renewable is just huge with our need to move to zero emissions for climate. Now, when I talk about this, what's really important, because sustainability isn't so much about the trucks and everything, it's about people, is how do we engage and inspire, what you were saying. And when we have good examples, it gives people a chance to have a light shone on them, and it takes away all of the tunnel vision that we all go through about the urgency of day-to-day so that we can begin to drive and own what we need to do to move forward, to think about what's tomorrow or 2 years or even 5 years from now, because those things take time to do. In IKEA, sustainability is a key value. I mean, very simply, it's caring for people and planet, and we recognize that we have an impact. So what do we do with that? We measure it, and then we see how can we turn that into a positive impact. And you can kind of get a sense of this by the IKEA sustainability strategy. And in that strategy, we're committing to become climate positive by 2030. And also by 2030, we have an ambition to transform the company into a circular business. When you think about IKEA, you may not think about it as circular, but that's an ambition. Also, ambitions around living wages and decent and meaningful work. When we look at supply chain operations with all the hard-to-abate stuff, what about our impacts? By 2040, we've made a commitment to only transport our goods on zero-emission heavy-duty trucks and ocean vessels, the hard-to-abate stuff. By 2030, which is a huge year for climate with regard to Paris and everything else and what we know about science, we've targeted an average 70% reduction on every shipment. And over the last 5 years, we've already reduced our emissions by 18% on average. So we're off to a start, but we have to accelerate. So we know that reaching our goals isn't going to be easy, and we can only do it together, as Lee said, and as we all know, when we do it together, but the momentum is building, and we believe we can do it.
Thanks, Steve. And it is all about
I'm
people.
going to give, can you hear me? I'm going to give a TED Talk and a TikTok because they gave me 3 minutes. So here's some big thoughts for you. To me, 2023 is the year that ESG is moving from marketing to compliance, and I mean deep compliance. Just going to fly through some of the big developments on ESG requirements this year, following on what Travis was saying. At the international level, we've got the International Sustainability Standard Boards issuing IFRS 1 and 2 financial reporting rules that will become the global baseline. Regional, we've got the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive into effect this year, impacting even foreign companies. EU's just adopted supply chain specific directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive on environment and human rights obligations. Last week, the final version of the first 12 EU sustainability reporting standards covering full value chain. National level, we got the German Supply Chain Act in effect, the Singapore mandatory climate reporting standards. Under the ISSB, Japan and Hong Kong to follow. Brazil stock exchange rules. The Indian Securities and Exchange Board with mandatory ESG reporting for top companies and on the supply chain for top companies. Our own US SEC keeps promising mandatory climate disclosure rules, rumored for October. Last week, the proposed sustainable products and services procurement rule. But what is deep compliance? This is when the legal requirements can be the catalyst for change at your organization. Finally, you can get the funds and attention needed to make the important changes, because you are going to have meaningful ESG commitments, reporting, and impact in order to be a listed company, in order to get finance, in order to import, export, and very importantly, to keep your social license. If you don't have the permission of the communities you serve, then you won't be operating there long. And this applies to your whole value chain, not just your supply chain. In Brazil this year, a Korean manufacturer of amazing excavators found this out. A big NGO started grassroots campaign showing that their excavator was the equipment of choice for illegal loggers who were taking over, deforesting Amazon, and invading indigenous areas. Enough noise and signatures got the Korean company to stop selling equipment to those states, cancel warranty service, and cancel dealerships for operators that had set up just to service that sector. And With AI, which we've been talking and hearing a lot about, there will be no hiding on your ESG journey. We have AI tools now that can ferret out greenwashing almost in real time. Check out later Clarity AI, Greenwatch AI, Kindberg, Climate Trace, not to mention some badass methane tracking satellites already reporting and tracking. So what do I recommend? Form a transversal and diverse team at your company to look at what the standards require and how you can turn compliance into the best business opportunity possible. How can your compliance set you up to be a market leader? What efficiencies can compliance lead you to develop? ESG and compliance should no longer be departments off in the corner. They should be a member on every team.
Thank you, Mel. That was impressive. And I would want to speak to another aspect of the ESG topic, and that is the corporate strategy, right? And I can really relate to that because in the past many years I've been involved really with a lot of different customers of ours. I have seen closely, even though my roles have not been fully dedicated to sustainability as such, it has been completely intertwined with the subject. I have seen companies really put the sustainability aspect as the center of their corporate strategies, which in the more advanced strategies has also permeated how they activate the supply chain strategy with clear sustainability goals. And I have not only seen the strategies, but for some of the more advanced companies when it comes to ESG, I have seen how those strategies have been put in motion, how they have been executed, and really we have been part of the journey on tracking results and so on. Now, we talked a bit about, or Mel talked a bit about policy, regulation, and so on, which we're really also in favor of at Maersk. But there's also an aspect of the consumer pressures, right? Of course, if we think about certain industries, I was actually heading our global fashion and lifestyle industry or vertical for the past 4.5 years. And by doing that, of course, I know quite a lot about that industry and what our customers are doing. And my focus, besides really going into ESG, has been mostly around decarbonization and how to help our customers in assessing and reducing the carbon footprint throughout time in their supply chains. And I have seen how things have been moving along, and that collaboration with customers has really helped us to move the needle. And one last thing, what I've learned is that the consumer pressure out there for certain industries is also making a difference, because there are pioneers, there are companies that are really at the forefront. There are regulations, yes, but there are companies that have, some of our customers, for example, that have the sustainability topic embedded in how they basically do things. They are not waiting for policy, let me put it that way. And now the consumer pressure is also making other companies actually react faster, because in certain markets, it is simply no longer okay to not be sustainable. Just the sole perception of a group of consumers that a brand is not sustainable could actually take the sales down. So it is quite relatable when it comes to the financial aspect of the business as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Lots of different perspectives, and it's a very broad topic and becoming more structured, but still very large and growing. And it'll be interesting to see how all of these things evolve, and will they be consistent across the world, or will we be dealing with some kind of balkanized, fragmented set of structures that we have to all figure out how to work with? So we're going to have a few questions now. What I did was have them brainstorm the questions they would like to ask each other. So we'll start with some of those questions and call on a couple of people to answer those questions. So first of all, how does sustainability weave into supply chain management? What are key topics and trends for your organization or industry, and key challenges? And let's start with you, Steve.
Sure. You talked about integrating and having somebody on the team. So In IKEA, in supply chain operations, if you're on a business team, you'll probably have a sustainability developer with you. It's not somebody who reports to the sustainability department, it reports to the business development manager.
That's great.
They're right on the team. And they, along with the team, move on a whole bunch of different processes that are really about bringing in our service providers and the business teams together to move things forward. So we have this really good code of conduct. One of our service providers said, I love this because it tells me all the things that I need to do. And it covers the social, the environmental, working conditions, and other things. And it's audited. When we get to the point where people can audit themselves, then we know we've won, right? We want to know how the drivers are doing. So we survey drivers in our different markets to find out what their working conditions are like so that we can learn how to do better. There's a driver shortage. We want to know how to do better. We survey all of our service providers and ask, what are you doing around environmental stuff? What are your practices? What are your assets? What are your aspirations? And then we share this so that they know and can do better. Because again, we can't do it alone. In our tender process, we go out for bids. Tell us, we have these routes. Can you do better? Can you make it more sustainable and reduce your emissions? And what about the decarb agenda, right? So day to day, we work with our service providers in order to carry some agendas forward, like we know we have to reduce fossil fuels. It doesn't matter what you're doing. In Germany, we were able to use a bigger trailer and reduce emissions by 10%, right? It's a lot of trucks. 10% is a big deal. We know we have to replace fossil fuels, so we bundled the emissions of the demand of warehouses in some of our key markets, and we went out for bids. We were able to get renewable electricity contracts. That's not always so easy to do. And in some cases, the contracts were substantially less expensive than the previous contracts. And then thinking outside the box. So we brought on, I mentioned these heavy-duty electric vehicles. In Canada, we have a service provider who's now charging their electric vehicles with hydropower. So it's completely zero emission. If you're in IKEA and in supply chain, you want to come up with a good business case, you have to include the sustainability perspective, just like you would performance and cost and safety. It's just what we do. And I think lastly, we measure, and we measure a lot, because how do you know how you can do better if you don't measure? Yeah. And we can share the measures with our service providers so they can know what they can do better. I mean, we can all measure in all of our businesses. But it's not just about facts, it's also about hearts and minds, as you were saying. It's just as important because it's people that got us here, but it's people who are going to get us out into the future that we want to create together.
Fantastic, thank you. Josue, how about your perspective?
Well, it's a broad question, right? There are a few questions in one, and I would like to focus on one item and one item only at the moment, and that is, in a way, seen as a challenge, right? So, roughly 10% of all the emissions of a company are related to transport and logistics. Of course, there can be a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on the business model, depending on the supply chain. But broadly speaking, we're talking about roughly 10% of all the emissions of a business. Now, we can think about that in a few different ways. 10% doesn't sound like the biggest percentage, because when I say 10%, maybe many of you would think about what is the other 90%, or what about that 90%? The truth is, the 90% has been top of mind already for a lot of companies when sustainability has been becoming top of mind. We can talk about manufacturing practices, sourcing, a lot of areas within the value chain which have been really top of mind for companies. Now, transport and logistics is really interesting because when we think about the 10%, part of it is related to logistics topics that can be controlled directly by a company. For example, a big company that owns their own warehouse, they have their own staff, they can actually have their own practices, implement that, and really make an impact on that particular facility. However, normally, vast majority of that 10% is not directly controlled by a company. It is what we refer to, I'm not sure, maybe some of you have heard this, Scope 3. Scope 3 emissions are basically the emissions that are generated outside of the direct control of a company in that sense. And really, that's where Maersk is really interested in really making the awareness or bringing the awareness up in terms of what can be done. Sometimes we don't have the solutions, but we know there is a challenge, so we have to co-create as well with the industry, with industry players and with customers in order to actually bring those solutions to life. And there are actually alternatives out there. And in many cases, what I see is that awareness is not there. And in some cases, companies do not necessarily know. Some companies do, but not every company knows how to actually bring those emissions down. Some companies don't even know how their emissions are panning out because they haven't been able to measure that. So for me, it's actually tackling that challenge. How do we actually do something about that 10% related to transport and logistics? Because we can. And actually not doing something about it is simply because we haven't put our minds to it. So that's actually the one topic I wanted to bring up. Well, I could bring up more things, but given the time, I would just keep it to that.
We're all watching a clock with big red numbers counting down over here. So Amrita, we've just heard from two big companies, global operations. How about you?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I want to talk about sustainability from the standpoint of like a startup trying to bring like new innovations to the market, and how being a startup is actually a benefit when we're looking at it from like a material standpoint. So these big companies, right? Like if we're talking about the diaper industry, right? It's like 80% is owned by Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark, roughly. Let's say 70 to 80%. If P&G or Kimberly-Clark were to come out with a new, let's say they want to do an all-cotton diaper or an all-sugarcane fiber diaper or take some other natural material. First of all, in the hygiene industry, these supply chains are not developed today. So if they want to do it, they're going to the suppliers and say, hey, and they need it in volumes that are like insurmountable, right? They're going to be like, I need 1 billion pounds of this kind of cotton tomorrow versus, and those supply chains are not there. So being a startup, it's actually a huge advantage because we can work with them on building out these supply chains. And we've found that to be, I've had this question all like, how are you able to convince suppliers to work with you? And I think one is obviously selling the vision, but then secondly, once they're bought into the vision, us as a small, nimble team, we are actually the right partner for these people because as these new materials are being developed, we're like the perfect people that can try things in small quantities. I'm not selling 1 billion diapers in year 1. I mean, I wish I was, but I'm not there yet. Maybe year 3. But so because I'm able to do it in quantities of millions of diapers instead of billions of diapers, that's been a huge thing. And so we're able to build out those supply chains together. But I think the other thing that I always think about from in my industry is the reality is like price. Price is always like, diapers are a very, very expensive product. And like as much as, are we the cheapest product in the market? No. Are we the most expensive? No. We try to brand ourselves as like affordable luxury. The reality is using cotton is 6x the cost of using polypropylene. So when is sustainability really going to come to the masses? It's when the sustainable materials are cheaper than the non-sustainable counterparts, right? How do we get to that point that cotton, sugarcane fiber, bamboo, all of these things are actually cheaper than your polypropylene and polyethylene? And I think that's when you're going to be seeing it happening. That's when sustainability is going to become mainstream when it comes to like consumer products. So at the end of the day, price is like very, very important, but startups like us can play a very, very important part in building out those supply chains to eventually bring that cost down over time.
Very interesting perspective, and how fundamental it is in your business strategy too. So these are things that people might not always have thought about as being part of ESG. They've thought about them as being business strategy. But this is becoming an integrated strategic requirement and a C-suite issue.
And we've seen this where suppliers have been like, we've tried to pitch this idea to Pampers or to Huggies, but they're like, we can only do it if we have 10,000 tons for a trial, and with some of these new materials, if you're making them on trial lines, we can only make a ton. So like, then like, people like Kudos, we are the perfect option to really like bring these new materials to the masses.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, let's move on to another question. How do each of you handle sustainability across the global landscape of cultures and regulations? Should one size fit all? Should you have the same corporate standards across the world, or should you adapt them by culture? How do you define diversity in a global organization? So let's start with Mel on this one. Clearly she's got her
Thanks.
finger on the pulse
That's a great
of this.
question. I definitely am always a bridge between cultures and legal systems. And I think that one of the goals would be, I think Travis and I have talked about this offline, but one of the goals is some of these international global standards like the ISSB reporting, or not necessarily EU, which is going to try to drag us along to their standard, but some of these international standards will help us define what is ESG, so that when we're talking about my metrics and your metrics, they align. But I think that in a global reality, we're going to have to understand that ESG claims and requirements also have some equity issues underlying them. And we see this at the climate change conversations, where you have very established economies that realize they are the primary producers of carbon emissions, telling emerging economies that are actually much better players that they need to not develop their resources and they need to not develop their economies because, well, now we're all in a bad place and we need to cut back. So I think that we have to bring, I think that we are moving toward, or the best would be to move toward internationally accepted global metrics and reporting standards. But as we begin to realize, okay, if we're going to do like a cap and trade and we say we only have a set bucket of carbon to be produced from here on out, we're going to have some very long and intricate discussions about the equity underlying who gets to use those and who doesn't. In my region in Latin America, one of the big things is we have all these ESG goals, and we love to talk about protecting the Amazon as the, it is the lung of the world, if they'll think of it that way. But the Amazon is not a large natural park. It is actually the sovereign territory of 8 different countries that just this week, while we were here, had one of the first modern, meaningful Amazonian summits, to where they decided the goals for that region and what they want for ESG and how they're going to define the Pan-Amazonian policy and agenda. And that somehow hits better to me than folks over in Europe deciding what the Amazon ought to look like. So I think as we move forward, I love the idea of global metrics. I love the idea of Paris agreements and international cooperation, but we all need to show up in our best collaborative spirit and talk about environmental justice, talk about equity, and talk about some local sovereign control over lands, because some of the things that we all want to move the green transition and the energy, the green tech and all, those require real resources like lithium. And the lithium triangle, again, is in my region. That's Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. And so we're going to have to talk about how do we get the lithium that we all need for the green vehicles that we want without polluting and causing devastating environmental damage to these indigenous populations. So very holistic ideas, lots of deep thought. Let's bring our SNOP people up here that manage all of these. The prior panelists, I was already recruiting them in my mind for ESG issues, and get them to help us have all these conversations and move along in a way that there is some local control, some global metrics, and always respect for everybody's local sovereignty.
Thanks, Mel. Travis, what's the legal perspective on this? Lots of work for lawyers.
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer, so I like words. And I like the word sustainability, because the root of it is the ability to sustain, to continue to exist. And if you look back 50 years at the Fortune 100 companies in the stock exchange, for example, and then flash forward and see how many of them are still in existence. What happens is that the policies, the procedures, the way that we organized ourselves didn't fit into the new ethos, into the new set of rules that we had to play by. And we're seeing that happen right now before our eyes. Take example, one of the hottest topics in the regulatory community, which is supply chain mapping. Like, there is a giant trade war happening between the United States and China at a magnitude and a scale that we've never seen before. The 2 largest trading ecosystems ever, and there are billions of dollars of detainments and fines that are happening on an annual basis. It's insane. Now, the call to action is something that everybody in this room has to kind of think about. Can I look not just at my direct spend, not just at my outsourced partners, but to the next tier, and then to the next tier, and then to the next tier, and not just look at what I bought, but look at who they transacted with. You now have to think about your supply chain as though you had made the thing yourself, with the same level of scrutiny, rigor that you would apply had you built it. In a lot of ways, it's almost the repercussion of outsourcing and globalization over the last 20 years. The law is caught up with the practice. When those new rules and regulations start to fall in, we have to have unbridled transparency, insights. What it also means is that every country is going to handle it a little different. So what we're creating is a race to the top. In fact, if you look at the World Trade Organization, which I love the data point, on any given year, there's about 4,000 new technical barriers to trade added. Added. Now, a lot of them could be lettuce, and that's good. I want there to be clean lettuce that comes in. That's important to me. But a lot of them can also be showstoppers for your organization. You might not be able to have methyl ethyl death in your product, or it's banned. It may not be able to be touched by somebody that's a slave, or it's banned. It may not be able to be imported through a certain location, or have IP from one location, or have a cybersecurity element. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't ever use that supply chain or work with them. It just means you might not be able to use that supply chain to import that product into that jurisdiction or that location. So what this means is we're going through an era of regionalization. So we're going to start thinking about maybe the Americas, maybe Asia Pac, maybe Europe differently. Like, think about Europe, what they're doing. It's called the circular economy. That means everything stays there. It comes from here, it gets recycled here, it gets manufactured here. It's a circle, a loop. You can't get in, you can't get out. These are the policies and procedures that are shaping the way that the world will be tomorrow. And if we don't abide to them, if we don't adapt to them, we'll find ourselves in the same place that those Fortune 100 were 50, 60 years ago. Extinct. You will not have been able to sustain.
Interesting perspective. Now let IKEA speak a minute here, because IKEA, I think, was probably the leader in establishing the IWay process and in assuring those vendors at the multiple tiers. So can you give some insight on?
Yeah, IKEA takes a total supply chain approach. So you wouldn't want somebody to be mistreated in your workplace, right? But we assume that if somebody's in our supply chain, that they should be treated or not mistreated the same way. So we have IWay, which is basically a standard that no matter where you are, you have to do. If you're a worker, you're going to expect that you're not going to be mistreated. And if you're a service provider, you can expect that you're going to meet these requirements, not just of your region, but often at a higher level that brings you in accordance with what decent and meaningful work is and good working conditions. So while we respect cultures around the world, and there's also different cultures in companies, and there are different regulations in companies. So that's, on the one hand, sometimes, what am I trying to say here? Sometimes different cultures and regulations allow us to move faster in some places. Sometimes it hinders us. So if we were trying to bring women drivers, more diversity into our supply chain, that sounds like a great idea, but if you're in certain countries, if you're not thinking about are women drivers protected, is it safe for them, it may not work. You may not want to be encouraging more without making sure that they have the right foundation. With our decarbonization, the differences in cultures and regulations allow us to move more quickly in different countries. So like in China, you can zoom ahead with this network of zero-emission fuel cell trucks. And doing that, we could collaborate with people in order to bring on the OEMs for maintenance and the fuel supplier and the fueling stations as well as the service providers. That's a very complicated thing to do. You can't do that everywhere. In Australia, we were bringing service providers, supporting their drivers to learn about fuel efficiencies. So by reducing idling, they reduce their emissions and their pollution. And in Germany, for the first time, we were able to move goods from our distribution center to our store on rail, directly on rail. So when you have a good rail network that's supported, you can do that. Just one more thing about iWay. We don't tell people how to get there with respect to the different cultures and organizations and countries. That's a mistake. You set a target and you allow people, based on whatever their expertise is in culture and regulations, to find their way there. We're there to support them. We give technical support if they want, but we tell them where the targets are. And by having targets, it allows people to work together, be efficient, and move towards that direction efficiently.
Thanks. And Mel, you had a
No,
comment
that
you
covered
wanted
it
to
great.
share. Oh, he
I
covered
thought,
it.
yeah,
Okay.
great point, Steve. I thought the global metric and then allow local rule as to how to achieve them. I think that's definitely the way forward.
Okay. Well, let's move on to another question. And Amrita, this is one you brought up. We all struggle with the balance of sustainability and cost.
Yeah.
So let's start with you then on any insights or innovative ways to handle this.
I think that's a tough one. I think the reality is until we can get, and I say this all the time, that I think until sustainable materials get to on par as your plastic alternatives, you're really not going to hit cost parity, and you're not going to hit the point where sustainability becomes mainstream. And I think it's up to, we're doing our part as small companies, but it's really up to, it's also up to the bit, I wish, there's in the diaper industry, I think P&G and I worked at Procter & Gamble, and I think them and Huggies are doing a ton, but it's not, for them to come out with a new product that's twice the cost, it doesn't make sense, especially when they're a market leader. So I think it's going to be a struggle constantly. And I think the other thing is that there's also this perception. I also think of this thing that we need to account for is elegant sustainability. I think there's always been this perception that oftentimes eco-friendly or sustainable products perform worse, or you're making a compromise by buying an eco-friendly whatever. And so I think the other thing that's important is, when is it going to become mainstream, is when what I like to call it is elegant sustainability. We need to do sustainability in an elegant way so that you're matching the performance of your non-sustainable counterparts. So I think it's a two-part thing. You need the performance and the price, and it's up to everybody, the big companies and the small companies. And I think a lot of it's just the supply chains for a lot of these materials just aren't developed to the point where we can get it to reasonable costs right now.
Thanks. Any other comments on the resources required to do this or those kinds of things?
I might have one add-on. I'd say something to consider is that probably a lot of the solutions we seek haven't been invented today. They probably don't exist yet. You can look back in time, and the people that got spacecrafts to the moon were actually called computers. That was a job. That was a human being computed, and they came up with these types of activities.
The Hidden Figures movie.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So the information that is starting to become available, just as a good example for ports, there's a movement where, as part of the Infrastructure Act, as part of the investment, to make all the maritime cargo information and AIS data publicly available. Well, think about what that could mean. Today, you can order a pizza or an Amazon, and you know exactly when it's going to get to your door. You can't do that with a cargo container. You have no idea when it's going to hit the port necessarily as a third-party buyer of that material. That might change in the next year or so. We have real-time visibility to when something's coming into port. That's incredible. What that does, how it starts to unlock innovation, how it allows us to now start to reconsider the way that this activity is going to happen, what it allows us to do in terms of concepts, both commercially as well as pragmatically as well as sustainably, opens up so many doors. And I think that's the things that we have to pay attention to, and keep our eyes on, because those incremental innovations will state the stage for the winners of tomorrow, the companies that are able to thrive in the new ecosystems.
I want to add one thing here. As much as I am an early adopter, I was on ChatGPT the second day or third day it came out. I love it. But I think also we need to take our DE&I very seriously, and we need diversity and inclusion. And I'm so excited about AI and all that it can bring. But I also think that there's a wealth of ancestral knowledge and indigenous knowledge that we also need to dig into for solutions. So wonderful documentary for all of us who live here in California. My home, Mi Casa Tu Casa, is up in Santa Barbara. And having lived through devastating fire about 5 years ago, thinking of Maui today, the indigenous communities of this area knew how to tend the forest. It's called stewards of the forest. They knew that you could not live right up in the forest. They knew that they needed to use the fire as a way of managing these habitats. So I'm hoping that AI will actually allow more voices to the table. I was so excited today when somebody up here was talking about we won't need writing anymore. You'll just be able to have a video and extract the knowledge from that. Think of the ethnobiographies that we could be out getting, collecting all of that knowledge, using AI to extract those learnings and throw it out there, because there are solutions to some of these problems that we don't know about here. There's a treatment for vitiligo out of Cuba that isn't known about outside of that area. I used to do General Motors audits, and one of my mentors was an auditor that audited at 100 countries. And he actually would take the best practices from each plant, document it, and when he went to audit another plant, share what they had done. And in Malaysia, they'd come up with this awesome technology to get rid of how to drain out the paint scraps. They'd invented this big filter, kind of like a big diaper, if you will, and pour it through that, and he would travel around. But for him, that would have been in an information silo. So I hope we can all use AI as a sexy new tool, but also still leverage a lot of human ingenuity and ancestral knowledge and indigenous knowledge and all of these voices solving what are human problems and continue to be human problems, getting one thing to another place. It's been going on for a long time. So I would say AI plus what we already know, and bringing as many voices into it as possible.
Okay, thanks. Interesting thoughts. You're bending my mind a little bit.
Sorry
here,
there.
This is a good thing. Always a good thing. So we've all highlighted that we can't do it alone. What are some of the examples of innovative partnering that you might be able to share, particularly with the students?
So yeah, maybe I can go first. And the one term I want to highlight is co-creation. I think, Lee, you mentioned it yourself, right? It's about collaboration. Nobody can do it alone. The co-creation that I have experienced myself at my work, right, has been incredible with different companies. In my case, a lot of it has been with customers that are really trying to make a change and really drive their sustainability strategies. For that to be effective, though, there needs to be a very solid partnership mindset. We can all talk about co-creation, and here I'm talking about co-creation across companies, right? We can also talk about co-creation within the same company across departments. That's also important, but I'm referring more to the co-creation and partnership across different companies. And for me, it has been enriching really to see how. I give you one example to explain it, right? We had a development which is called the emissions dashboard. We started working on that some 15 years ago or so. I was involved at some point in one of my roles in the past. And we started that with one customer that really had the initiative to, hey, we need to measure our emissions in the entire supply chain end to end. And we started actually when we didn't have the clarity as to how to do it. We enhanced that methodology. It's iterative process with that client throughout years. We enhanced that methodology, the emissions factors and so on, and fast forward, right? We have worked with so many different customers on that. We have now an automated tool to do that. But the point I want to bring you towards is the aspect of co-creation that started that whole topic. I mean, we were invested into it, but the customers were also invested into it. And that led to some really good development that is now helping to measure the emissions in supply chains for various other companies out there. The second thing I want to highlight is Well, the vessel you see here on the screen, it might seem like a standard vessel. It is not. It's actually the first ever methanol-enabled vessel, which is going to be in service starting in September, actually within Europe. We have, as Maersk, ordered 25 vessels. Some of them are quite larger than this one, but this is the first one. They will enter into service between 2023, the first one, and 2025. Of course, we own a lot of vessels, and those vessels are replacing the fossil fuel propelled vessels that we have. The good thing, though, while we can say that about Maersk, is that other companies are really, other shipping companies are going in and also pursuing this methanol-enabled vessels being manufactured. And why I say that is because it is super important to have the scale. To have the scale not of having a lot of vessels, but of having the demand for the fuel. So we are talking about not only having the technology, which is the vessel you see, but of having enough fuel. And the more demand that we have from both the logistics industry, but also from customers and consumers that really want this, it will enable us to actually scale the production of the methanol. And when we scale the production enough, like normal economics, with a lot of scale can come, let's say, a price reduction. So we want to drive that price down, and for that we need the demand. So we can say it's a chicken or the egg, but in a way, if we do not act now, it might remain a chicken or the egg for a long time, but we need to take action. So when we take action and we see it more and more, then actually change happens. So that's all I had to say about it. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Steve, did you have examples of
Yeah,
collaboration?
this is from the shipping line perspective, and from the cargo owner's perspective, we see it exactly the same way. So IKEA is part of this Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance to bundle demand in order to create the confidence that with investors and with the fuel suppliers and with the shipping lines, that the demand is there and that we can get to a complete zero emission shipping situation by sooner than later, right? We have to speed that up.
Exactly. And I think we're pretty aligned with that. I forgot to mention, but I guess it's important. The Maersk has a target to become net zero carbon by 2040, right? And we have interim targets. We're not waiting until then, but we have interim targets that are very specific by 2030 and so on. So that there's a lot of alignment in that sense between what I hear from IKEA and Maersk. But of course, even with that in mind, I'm sure we cannot do it alone. So we'll need the whole industry to come together.
Yeah. And I just want to add, in the old days, you used to be able to just say, okay, the equivalent of I'll just swap out my light bulb, to compact fluorescent or whatever. It was very simple. But now it's not so easy. These solutions require, we're talking about a whole coalition of cargo owners and shipping lines and things like that. Mm-hmm. So again, this collaboration is so essential to how we do this.
Yeah. And we all have to do it in ways that are not anti-competitive, right?
100%.
So which means you've got to tiptoe through those tulips carefully with the right structures. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things like that have to be considered in working together, but it is the way to accelerate progress. Mm-hmm. Now we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to do, not a lightning round, but give each of you 1 minute to talk about how do you stay ahead of the curve and plan for the future. Why don't we start down at that end, since we've been starting at this end every time. Josue, you want to start?
Well, to keep it short, I think we've mentioned it quite a lot. Co-creation, collaboration, the partnership mindset is crucial, acknowledging that with the best intentions, it is not possible to do this alone. I think while I say that, of course, a sustainability strategy for a company is a building block, a foundational block that is required. There needs to be, like I think Steve mentioned before, there needs to be targets that the whole world can actually act upon if it's a global company, right? But besides that, I think it's really important to acknowledge that even with the best strategy, if there's not enough collaboration with the industry or with different players, it's going to be quite hard to achieve that. And just in terms of motivation, I would say we can act now. I mean, we don't need to be afraid of hey, but nobody has done this. I mean, I've seen many companies doing things that are being done for the first time, and that's how actually change happens, right? If we are all sitting on the sidelines and waiting, then at some point we can, again, to my previous comment, it's a chicken or the egg, and we always think it is.
Thank you. Mel?
Yeah, mine will just be a few seconds. This is to cohort 11. You are all agents of change. Everybody can be a sustainability officer at their company on their team. If you're doing the SNOP, or if you're involved in analytics, or you're talking about data, bring up sustainability. Ask what your company is doing about ESG. How can you lead projects? How can you be involved? It really needs to be embedded in every aspect of your company, and you are the future of your company. So as you're studying, take some courses outside of your department if you're allowed. Go take an ecology class, take an environmental class, take a social governance class. So get informed, see yourself as part of your company's sustainability team, even if that's not in your title, because it really is going to take everybody coming together to work on this.
Steve?
Sustainability is not really an option, so it's a good thing if you can, in your work and in your companies, elevate that idea, right? It's not something that we can wait for tomorrow. So it's also important to know where you're going with it. If you have a destination, then you can actually, again, work together effectively, and you have the chance to get there.
Amrita?
I think in the startup world, it's important to just never get complacent, that you have a good enough product. It's always to stay on the cutting edge of innovation. And to your point, a lot of these things have not been invented yet, right? How do we do that so that we have the ability to sustain, right? So that we are not extinct in 100 years and we haven't been able to keep up with the times. And I think it's this point of just never being complacent and always willing to continue to take those technology risks to continue pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Perfect. And you don't get the last word, I do, but go ahead.
I'd say for the generation that's here, that's coming up, a couple words of advice from an old man that made it around the block once or twice. You're the single largest generation our country's ever seen. You're digitally savvy, you're brave, and you're willing to challenge norms in a way that no one has seen before. And I can recall when I was a young man, I was the first graduating class of ASU for something called environmental science, where we were just starting to look at ice cores and figure out that there might be this thing, global warming, fork 'em devils. And everybody thought I was crazy for wanting to go into that. It doesn't even exist. It's not a discipline. But flash forward through my career, taking those chances, taking those risks, trying something new and novel that others might not see is what will define your life and will give you the value and the purpose that you seek.
Fantastic. So ESG, environment, social, and governance, has become a C-suite issue and an organizational strategic imperative and a priority for every department within the organization in terms of delivering it. And this must be the decade of action. Thank you very much.